If you're somebody who has a difficult time figuring out how to warm up effectively and properly at the gym so you can lower your risk of injury, have better performance, and mentally prepare yourself for your training, this video is for you. In this video, we're going to talk about the differences between static stretching and dynamic stretching, when it's appropriate to use both, and also the benefits of both. The last thing we're going to cover in this video are some examples of warm-ups that you can start to incorporate with your own exercises starting today. So hang tight for that. That's going to be at the end of the video. We're going to first talk about why it's important to warm up in the first place. It's really important to understand why we warm up in the first place in order to pick the right warm-up exercises and right warm-up movements. The purpose of a warm-up is to increase your overall body temperature, your core temperature, to allow for optimal ranges of motion, increase your performance, lower your risk of injury, and also to properly activate, and this word's a little controversial because your muscles are always activated, they're always firing, but to properly warm up your muscles so it can prepare for that neuromuscular load and the stimuli that you're going to be putting on them. So let's cover static stretching. A static stretch is when you hold an end range position for longer than about 15 seconds. The purpose of a static stretch is really just to increase your flexibility over time. I will say this right off the bat, a static stretch is not the best for warming up. So I'm going to show you what a static stretch looks like. So this is a static hamstring stretch. I'm going to show you. And so that's a static stretch. So if I hold this longer than 15 seconds, I am trying to increase my flexibility. And you may be thinking, how is that not beneficial for a warm-up? Doesn't that help loosen my muscles? Research actually shows that there's not a whole lot of change happening at the structural level unless you are specifically trying to increase your flexibility over time. But if you're just statically stretching before an exercise or before you're training to warm up, you're not really making a whole lot of change and you're not really doing anything else. Static stretching doesn't really increase your core temperature. It doesn't really mimic any training movements. Now you might be thinking, but wait, Marilyn, I do feel like my muscles are getting looser. That feeling has been shown to actually be more psychological or subjective. I know it's hard to believe, but that is just what the research shows. Dynamic stretching, on the other hand, does help increase your performance, reduce your injury risk, allow optimal ranges of motion, increase your core temperature, prepare your muscles to handle neuromuscular load. Dynamic stretching is the way to go. Let's get into what dynamic stretching actually is. Dynamic stretching is a lot like unweighted body movements. So think air squats, lunges. And when I say unweighted, meaning you're not holding dumbbells, you're not holding barbells, you're just doing body weight. The important difference between a static stretch versus a dynamic stretch or dynamic movement is that you're not holding the end ranges in a dynamic stretch. If anything, you might hold it for 2 seconds, 1 to 2 seconds. The purpose of it is not to hold the end ranges, not to stretch the muscle to increase flexibility over time. The purpose is more to have controlled elongations and contractions of the muscle. So it's not ballistic movements, it's not a quick movement, it really is controlled movement. And they tend to mimic the exercises that you're going to be doing in your training. For example, if you are going to be squatting really heavy, you might want to do air squats or some sort of hip extension movement like lunges. So the key points of dynamic stretching is that they're going to be controlled movements that mimic the exercises you're going to be completing in your training. And to recap, dynamic stretching should be done in a warm-up to prepare you for your training. Static stretching can be done typically after or in a separate session to improve your flexibility. So now that we broke down the difference between static and dynamic stretches, let's talk about how to actually implement a proper warm-up. As I mentioned before, one of the purposes of a warm-up is to increase your core temperature. So if you feel like doing dynamic movements and stretches alone is not doing the trick, you can incorporate some low to medium intensity cardio to help increase your core temperature and warm you up a little bit better. I suggest doing that before you do the movement specific work and to keep it short and simple because you don't want to fatigue too much. How long a warm-up takes will be very individual to who you are as a person, what your main goals are, and so many other factors. Personally, my warm-up takes about 10 to 15 minutes, no longer than 15 minutes. The sun just came in. I don't know what to do. Okay guys, so the sun just came into my living room and completely blinded me. So I'm going to switch over to this angle, this view. What a dynamic warm-up might look like is picking 3 to 5 exercises and doing a few rounds of each exercise. For each round, you want to keep the repetitions high, but see how you feel. You don't want to overdo it either. You don't want to fatigue yourself before you go into your training. What I like to think of is stimulate, don't annihilate. Now I'm gonna run you guys through an example of a full body warm-up. This is just an example, so keep in mind that you can alter this, you can modify it as needed. Think about what your training looks like, what types of exercises you do, and how you can create a warm-up that's specific to your training and what's going to prepare you most for your own training program. Without further ado, let's get to the warm-up. Alright you guys, that is the end of the video. I hope it was useful to you, and I hope that you feel a little bit more confident going to the gym next time, knowing how to warm up properly and what's going to give you the best results. If you liked the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next one.